Did Star Trek Lower Decks just axe Discovery from the main Star Trek timeline? So now Discovery is no longer canon?
Yes!
All good things come to those who wait, but especially to Star Trek fans who've struggled with the reality that is Star Trek Discovery. Since its 2017 debut, Discovery has put many fans in a bind because while it was the first new Star Trek show in 12 years and covered a time period many fans wanted to see explored, the tone, the look, and the writing for the show left some fans feeling that this wasn't Star Trek. There were many, many problems with the show, but one of the most glaring was the Klingons. Since Star Trek the Motion Picture, Klingons have looked like this, but in Discovery, they looked like this. Keep in mind, Discovery is set 10 years before the original series, where the Klingons looked like this. Star Trek writers struggled for years to explain the change in the Klingons' appearance from the original series to the films, finally coming up with a barely plausible explanation in the Enterprise episode Affliction. In that episode, we find out that the Klingons took a drug designed from augmented human DNA to make themselves stronger, but it had the opposite effect, making them weaker and giving them a more human appearance. The affected DNA then mutated into a virus and nearly wiped out the Klingon race. Dr. Phlox from the NX Enterprise created a cure for it, but it only prevented the Klingons from dying. The physical changes still occurred across the entire race, with most if not all of them looking more or less human after a period of time. It would take the Klingon race nearly 200 years to go back to their original appearance. So during that time, the Klingon High Council, fearing that the people who took too long to change would become outcasts, sent anyone afflicted with the condition into the Klingon Defense Forces so that they could earn a place of high honor. This is why the Klingons Kirk and his crew encountered during the original series basically look human, but by the time of the Star Trek motion picture, they look more like the Klingons we know and love. Like I said, a barely plausible explanation. But the explanation for the change in Discovery is much worse. See, the Klingons the Discovery crew encounters split off from the Klingon Empire 200 years before the show starts, and during that very long 200 years, they somehow evolved to gain blue skin and more head ridges. They're not actually bald, but instead shaved their heads in honor of Kahless the Conqueror, who once cut his hair and tossed it into lava and used the hardened remains to make the first bat'leth. Yeah, that's just fucking silly. And that says a lot when people are willing to accept tribbles. The real problem is that for all the fantasy in Star Trek, the show does still hold to some legitimate science, and 200 years of separation isn't enough to have that dramatic a physical change in the species, especially since these Klingons weren't affected by the virus because they were on their ship during the events of Star Trek Enterprise. With it being Star Trek, you'd think someone would add in an element to make the altered appearance work, like, say, time dilation. Maybe something happens to the ship to put them out of sync with regular space-time. For the outside world, only 200 years have passed, but within the ship, thousands of years have passed. Then this would make more sense. But Discovery was not that kind of show. That brings us back to Lower Decks and the series finale. In the final episode, some Klingon ships encounter a multi-dimensional anomaly that changes anything that it touches into an alternate reality version of itself. So, the typical Klingon ship changes into a Discovery-style Klingon ship, and one of its crewmen changes into a Discovery-style Klingon. Now, here's the trick. That can only happen if Star Trek Discovery is not part of the main Star Trek timeline. It has to be an alternate reality for this to work. So, Lower Decks kinda wiped Discovery out of the main Star Trek canon. And it's glorious. Cinema Blend reached out to Lower Decks showrunner Mike McMahon for a comment, and he gave this cheeky response. Quote, "Listen, I'm not going to tell fans how to respond to anything. If you watch Fisher Quest, you can see the timelines across different realities are all messed up. Was I being a little stinker with that moment and knowing what I was doing? Yeah, I'm not dumb. It's also not firmly established. Another multiversal shift we saw is it turned into a Klingon sail barge. You can take that moment however you want and talk to me about it in 10 years. Yeah, I think he cut it from canon, but did it in a way where there's plausible deniability, because it could always be another timeline that just happens to look like the one nobody likes. I do know some people who claim they like Discovery. I do not. I've seen clips from the show across all 5 seasons, and every time I think, maybe I'll give it a chance, I see something that reminds me I made the right choice the first time. Even the people I know who like it can barely maintain their enthusiasm for it. One of my friends tried explaining the plot of the 3rd season to me, and I could see on his face that he realized he was losing interest in the show that he claims he likes as he spoke. And he's a lifelong Trek fan. What does it say about this show when the Star Trek showrunner currently employed by the company soft retcons the show out of the timeline? And he's working on Star Trek Academy, another show that'll include some Discovery characters, and he still cut them out the main canon. That is bogus as hell. And also, it's a Christmas miracle. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.